10 minutes past 7 o'clock now. Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused the Palestinian militant group Hamas of leaving him no choice but to expand and intensify the military campaign against it. The Israeli army says it's issued a warning to residents of eastern and northern Gaza to leave their homes. The health ministry in Gaza said Israel airstrikes killed at least 6 people overnight, bringing the number of deaths since the hostilities increased last Tuesday to more than 200. Well, Hamas spokesman Osam Hamdan held out a slim hope for peace, telling the BBC that Hamas is prepared to discuss ideas for a ceasefire, provided they were properly conveyed through political channels.
We said clearly in Hamas we are not able to discuss ideas published in the media. To discuss ideas, proposals, it's supposed to be through political channels, which is working now. We will discuss any ideas which can come through political channels, because we have said from the first day we must achieve a ceasefire, a fair ceasefire which will help and protect the Palestinian people.
Well, Nabila Ramdani is a Middle East commentator. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What is meant there by political channels, this negotiation being conveyed properly in Hamas's view through these channels?
Well, of course, as we know, the truce negotiated by Egypt didn't work, and for several reasons, it has to be said, and for several obvious reasons. Egypt is a military regime and not a democratic one, and therefore not an honest broker in all this. But crucially, Hamas also claims that it hasn't been consulted at all, let alone seen their demands considered or indeed met. For example, one of the things they urgently ask for is the lift of the siege of Gaza, a place that has been described by David Cameron as an open-air prison. And of course, Israel controls Gaza effectively in every way. Not only it controls its sea borders, its air borders, its land borders, but it controls, water, electricity supplies, the movement of people and indeed of goods. So that's one of the things that Hamas is asking for, the effective lift of the siege. But also they're asking for the release of their prisoners. And as we know, before the last round of peace talks, Palestinian prisoners have been released from Israeli jails, but have been recaptured straight away. And that's a classical tactic that Israel carries out consistently. But and now that the negotiations and indeed the truce hasn't worked out, it somehow, as far as Israel is concerned, gives it legitimacy to threaten a ground offensive. But it has to be said that unless the underlying causes of this latest round of violence are addressed properly, there will be no effective and indeed long-lasting ceasefire. And that has very much to do with, military occupation, the longest in modern history, 47 years.
And what could the implications be, do you think, if there is a ground offensive? Because the noises coming out of Israel this morning are ominous, to say the least.
Well, as you've said in your introduction, the main development overnight is that the Israeli suggested that 10,000 civilians should leave their homes because of the possibility of airstrikes and indeed a ground offensive. And all this sounds a matter of fact as we discuss it at the beginning of a new working day. But can you imagine what it must be like for families already suffering massively to be advised to get up and go? And if they don't, there's a very good chance that they would end up dead or indeed maimed. So the practical horror is almost unimaginable. The people of Gaza have no money, they have no support system outside of their very basic communities, and they certainly don't have anywhere safe, let alone permanent, to go. Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, and the vast majority of people in Gaza will take a risk, adding psychological horror to the practical problems of leaving the homes. But it has to be said emphatically that issuing warnings by phone calls or indeed leaflets or flyers before bombing civilian areas does by no means give Israel legal cover as far as international law is concerned. It is very much a war crime to bomb civilian population indiscriminately, as Israel does, and it consistently breaches international law in this matter.
And what about the response so far from the international community? Is there anything that can be done at that level to help to bring the bloodshed to an end?
Well, unless the international community sincerely gets involved in dealing with the underlying and problems that trigger rounds of violence consistently, there could be no end in sight of this vicious cycle of violence. And America, in particular, has a very crucial role to play in all this. It could be an honest broker in all that, and holding Israel responsible for its crimes. But instead, it very much funds Israel. It is the only world superpower, and it's providing all the weapons to Israel, which is the fourth most powerful military force in the world, to deal with a perceived enemy.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. That's Nabila Ramdani, who is an expert in Middle East politics.